Hello, my dear students. Welcome to the next class of Appreciating Prose. In the last class, we have discussed about the Swiss doctor Marcel Junod, who was a representative of ICRC society and who was deployed by ICRC in different countries in helping people during war times. He also assisted people in Japan during Second World War. He arrived in Japan in the month of June in 1945, and he arrived in Tokyo on August 9th, the very same day that America dropped atomic bomb in Nagasaki. 6th of August 1945, they dropped atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and he organized assistance mission in Japan. He became the first foreign doctor to reach the site. As deployed by ICRC, he was to help the prisoners of war. He needed to visit the prisoners of war in Japan. But as an initiative, as a humanitarian, he also assisted the people in trouble. He also assisted the people of the devastated cities. That is why he's been hailed all across the world for his humanity. 3 weeks had passed since the 2 atomic bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But we still knew practically nothing about the fate of the devastated towns or of the innumerable victims. August 6th and 9th, the second week of August, bombs had been dropped, and it has been 3 weeks now. So probably by the end of the month, 30th August or something like that. It has been 3 weeks now, but they don't know anything about the devastated towns or about the victims of the bomb dropping. There is no communication from the cities, no radio communication, everything got lost. The city was devastated, destroyed. The American wireless had broadcast a very great deal about the preparations made for the use of the new weapon and about its extraordinary power. There was no news about the people or the devastated cities, but the American wireless, the radio, had transmitted the information regarding this extraordinary powerful weapon, the preparations made for the use of the new weapon, and about its power. News about this weapon and its power was broadcasted in the radio, but information concerning the effects of atomic bombardment was limited to the horrible prophecy. For 70 years at least, the radioactivity of the earth around the scene of the explosion will prevent all forms of life from existing there. There were no news about the devastated places. And the prophecy, or they spoke about the power of the weapon, but the information regarding the effects of this bomb was limited. Only thing was mentioned that for 70 years at least, the place will prevent all forms of life existing there. Environment has totally been destroyed. Air has been polluted. People cannot live happily and healthily there for a longer time. They cannot live there. All living organisms have been destroyed. At least for 70 years, it will prevent all forms of life from existing there. But there was no news about the place Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was no news in the radio. The Americans I had met the evening before on board the Benevolence had all fallen silent the moment I had mentioned the word Hiroshima. He was deployed by the Allied powers in Japan, and he met Americans in the ship Benevolence. The USS Benevolence was one of 3 hospital ships in Tokyo Bay on September 2nd, 1945. And it served as a stop in rehabilitation for thousands of Allied prisoners of war. It was also functioned as a hospital. So Marcel Junod met few Americans in the ship, and when he mentioned the word Hiroshima, they all felt silent. They all fallen silent. When they questioned me about Japan, they questioned about the prisoners of war of Allied forces in Japan, they avoided mentioning of Hiroshima. And when I uttered the word Hiroshima, I think we all felt an indefinable sense of discomfort. Everybody was disturbed when he mentioned the word Hiroshima. They were all masking the reality. For different reasons, the Japanese also maintained complete silence concerning the disaster which had brought about their sudden defeat. Japanese surrendered before Allied forces. And the Japanese also maintained complete silence. One thing, they got defeated in the war, and for the second thing, lakhs of people lost their life. The places have been completely destroyed. Economy has been broken down. It was only through the verbal reports which went from one end of Japan to the other that we began to have some idea of what the sudden cataclysm had meant for the inhabitants of Hiroshima. There was no news broadcast regarding Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There were only verbal reports. People were speaking about that. Only verbal reports were there, from mouth to mouth. They got only some idea about the disaster that happened in Hiroshima and how they are facing it. What was the effect of this atomic bombing on the inhabitants of Hiroshima? Only verbal reports were there. One of our secretaries, named Nohara, a half Japanese, sometimes repeated to us more or less the gist of what was being rumored among the Japanese. They don't know Japanese. And one half Japanese, Nohara, one of their secretaries, she spoke about Hiroshima, the verbal report which was rumored among the Japanese people. They got this verbal report from Nohara, what the situation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Many fugitives had fled from Hiroshima to seek safety with their families. People fled from the places. Those who got lives back, they just fled from the place. And their first-hand descriptions of the horror were profoundly disquieting. Remember, it is 1950s. Transportation facilities were not so vast. Trams were there, of course. Rails were there. But it was the period 70 years before, were limited. All the things were limited. They had to run from the places. They had to run for their lives. And their first-hand descriptions, those who fled the place, and their description of the horror were profoundly disquieting. Now the description goes on like this. The blinding light suddenly flashing out of a peaceful sky was a phenomenon much more terrible than an earthquake. It was a typhoon of glare. It was like a cyclone of light, heat, not just blinding light, but also extremely hot heat, and wind, strong heat wind, which had swept suddenly over the earth. The wind, strong heat wind, just suddenly all over their place, and left a sea of fire behind it. Only hot fires behind it, lights and fires behind. No one knew the total of the dead. They didn't get the total number of the dead people. Some said it is 50,000, and some said it is 2 lakhs. And there were just as many wounded or more. 2 lakhs, maybe 2 lakhs more wounded, the entire population. And of those who seemed at first to have escaped injury, thousands were dying every day with strange, new, and inexplicable symptoms. And those people who have survived the bomb disaster were dying every day because of unknown symptoms. Polluted air, maybe. The radioactive waves, polluted air. The symptoms cannot be explained, but people died. On 2nd of September, a Japanese policeman brought a copy of a telegram to our villa in Torosaka, for which Tokyo had not yet issued a censorship visa. On 2nd of September, a Japanese policeman brought a copy of a telegram to Junood. They were in Tokyo. And the telegram was from Bill Finger. Bill Finger was an ICRC delegate who arrived at Hiroshima on 30th of August. 3 weeks later, the disaster has happened. He arrived on 30th of August and he sent a telegram. And on 2nd September, they are receiving the telegram. And he sent off the following disjointed report, unorganized report, the horrifying report of Hiroshima. Radio networks were censored during that time. Even by 1900s, radio networks were censored. They have to look into the information they were broadcasting. And there were war correspondents to examine articles before it reached to the people to make sure that they are not breaking the rules. So the informations were censored. And the Japanese policeman who brought a copy of a telegram, that telegram was not censored. The actual problems in the place was at least reported through the telegram. And there was a law, newspaper law, which forbade the freedom of the press. And this law restricted publishing of major informations and thus leaving Japanese population ignorant of what was happening in Japan about the economic and military events. But Tokyo had not yet issued a censorship for that, and Junood could receive the telegram with a report, disjointed report.
Situation horrifying. 90% of town razed. All hospitals destroyed or severely damaged. Have visited 2 provisional hospitals. Conditions indescribable. 90% of the city got destroyed, like razed. hospitals damaged. Conditions of hospitals was indescribable. Bomb effects mysterious. Many victims apparently recovering suddenly experienced fatal relapse owing to degeneration of white corpuscles and other internal injuries. Some people seemed to be recovering, but they also got collapsed because of internal injuries. Deaths still occurring in great numbers. More than 1 lakh victims still in provisional hospitals and neighborhood places. Grave shortage of material. There is no medical supplies. Grave shortage of materials, bandages, medicaments. Appeal now what Billfinger wanted to do. Wanted American forces to do. Appeal allied high command supplies be parachuted immediately into center of town. Urgently need large supplies, bandages, cotton wool, ointments for burns, sulfamides, blood plasma and transfusion kits. Is an ICRC delegate, and he says that these things are urgently needed in the place. Urgently need large supplies, bandages, cotton wool, ointments for burns, sulfamides, blood plasma and transfusion kits. Immediate action necessary. People are losing their lives, or people are suffering with pain. Pain cannot be described. I took this telegram and the photographs, which I still had in my possession, and went at once to the Yokohama Chamber of Commerce, where General MacArthur had installed himself and his staff. Marshal Junood, who received the telegram, he just took the telegram to the Yokohama Chamber of Commerce. It is a port. Yokohama is a port. And there, General MacArthur had installed himself, and his staff was also there. Douglas MacArthur was an American military leader who served as general of the army, and he had a prominent role in Second World War. A few minutes after my arrival, 4 high officers were bending over the table on which I had wordlessly placed the photos and the telegram. So in the Yokohama Chamber of Commerce, there were 4 officers, and he placed the photos and the telegram of Billfinger. The 4 officers were General Fitch, who was the Chief of the US Information Service, Colonel Marcus, Chief of the Prisoners of War Department, Colonel Webster, Chief of the Hospital Service, and Colonel Sams, who was in charge of assistance for the civil population. So these officers were the first Americans to see photographs of Hiroshima taken on the ground after the fall of the atomic bomb. They are the first Americans to see photographs of devastated Hiroshima. Their faces were grave and attentive, and their expressions were a trifle wry at the sight of those carbonized corpses. They were not serious enough. They took it silly, and a displeased look at the sight of those photographs of dead bodies, photographs of dead people without head. No one spoke. No officer spoke, uttered a word. The photos went from hand to hand. General Fitch put on his glasses, and he read the telegram and then turned to me. What do you want us to do? They didn't took it as serious. They didn't take the telegram as serious. It was clearly written what it wanted. Immediate actions are required. Medical supplies need to be distributed there, but they were asking what they want to do. What did I want them to do? Wasn't Billfinger's telegram plain enough? it conveyed directly. There were 1 lakh wounded people without proper attention. Bandages, sulfamides, blood plasma. Billfinger had listed it all. Things they wanted, it was listed. I suggested that a rescue expedition should be organized at once. Then Marshal Junod suggested a speedy rescue operation should be done there. The general turned to Colonel Sams, who was in charge of assistance for the civil population. And he said, General Fitz said, "That's your department, I think," he said. The 4 officers put their heads together. Then one of them picked up the photos and the telegram. "Leave these with me," he said. "I want to show them to General MacArthur." It was 7th September. So 2nd September he took the telegram and he went to the Yokohama Chamber of Commerce, and it is 7th September then, 5 days later, before I heard anything further, and then Colonel Sam summoned me to Yokohama. He went to Yokohama Chamber of Commerce. He was in Tokyo only. And he said, "It is impossible for the United States Army to organize any direct relief action," he informed me, General Fitch. United States, US Army cannot organize any direct relief action, cannot come in and to offer the relief actions. But General MacArthur is willing to let you have 15 tons of medicaments and hospital material. But he is willing, General is willing to let you 15 tons of medicaments and hospital materials. They can provide hospital materials, but they can be distributed under the control and responsibility of the Red Cross. Americans will not interfere into it. Red Cross have to take the initiative to supply and distribute all the essentials. And he added, General Fitch added, "A commission of inquiry is leaving for Hiroshima tomorrow from American side. A seat has been reserved for you on board one of the planes. You can join them. He can join with the Americans in a plane for Hiroshima." Early on 9th of September, the investigation commission left the island of Miyajima. So on 8th of September, they boarded the flight to Miyajima, and from Miyajima on 9th of September, they went to Hiroshima. From a hotel, we walked along the shore of the little harbor. We boarded the boat which was to take us over the arm of the sea, a river. Arm of the sea, it is a river, which was to take us over the arm of the sea, which separated us from the main land. So they took the boat and they crossed the river and they reached Hiroshima. And there a car was waiting for us there, and I sat between 2 Japanese interpreters. A Miss Ito, who had been born in Canada, and a Japanese journalist who had spent 20 years in the United States.
They both gave me a great deal of information about what Hiroshima had once been. The interpreters gave him the description about Hiroshima, its main activities, and also they gave the information about its geography. I needed their accounts in order to compare the reality of yesterday, a busy, prosperous town, with the reality of today. He needed their description. He needed the information about Hiroshima before and after. The desolating spectacle, the striking view after its utter destruction by one flash of blinding, searing light. "Hiroshima," explained the fragile Miss Ito. "Hiroshima means the broad island," she said. "It was built on the delta of the river Ota, that flows down from Mount Kamuri. And it was the seventh town in point of size in Japan. The seven arms of the Ota River, seven rivers which pour their waters into the inland sea, enclose in an almost perfect triangle the harbour of the town. And the place had factories, an arsenal, oil refineries, and warehouses. Hiroshima had a population of 250,000 people, and in addition, there was a garrison of about 150,000 soldiers. Group of troops, soldiers, they were stationed there to protect the place. So nearly 4 lakh people were there. The verbal reports said that 2 lakh people died and almost that much people got wounded. The whole city got destroyed. Whole city got destroyed. And the journalist described.
So 2 lakh people were died, somebody said, and that much amount of people also wounded, and people are dying day by day of unexplained symptoms. The journalist described. Journalist who had spent 20 years in the United States, a Japanese journalist, he described, on 6th of August, there wasn't a cloud in the sky above Hiroshima. It was a clear sky. And a mild, hardly perceptible wind blew from the south. Visibility was almost perfect for 10 or 12 miles. It was a clear sky. At 9 minutes past 7 in the morning, an air raid warning sounded, and 4 American B-29 planes appeared. 4 planes appeared. To the north of the town, 2 of them turned and made off to the south, and the planes disappeared in the direction of the Shoho Sea. The other 2 B-29 planes, after having circled the neighborhood of Shukai, flew off at high speed southwards in the direction of the Bingo Sea. They could see all these things because it was a clear sky. At 7:31, the all clear was given. Feeling themselves in safety, people came out of their shelters and went about their affairs. People started their daily routine, morning time, and the work of the day began. I'm also feeling tensed. Suddenly, a glaring whitish-pinkish light appeared in the sky, accompanied by an unnatural tremor, which was followed almost immediately by a wave of suffocating heat and wind which swept away everything in its path. A glaring whitish-pinkish light appeared in the sky, the dropping of the bomb, accompanied by an unnatural tremor, followed almost immediately by a wave of suffocating heat and wind that swept away everything in its path. Within a few seconds, thousands of people in the streets, in a second, it is not taking minutes, in a seconds, few seconds, thousands of people in the streets and the gardens in the center of the town were scorched by a wave of searing heat, were burned by a wave of hot heat. People were just turning into ashes. Many were killed instantly. Others lay writhing on the ground, screaming in agony from the intolerable pain of their burns. They cannot tolerate the pain of burns. They don't know what has happened. A heat wave suddenly, flashing light, blinding, searing light suddenly. Everything standing upright in the way of the walls. That means the walls, houses, factories, and the buildings was annihilated, and the debris spun round in a whirlwind and was carried up into the air. The debris of these buildings were spun round in like a whirlwind and was carried up into the air. The trams were picked up and they were tossed aside as though they had neither weight nor solidity. In that tremor, it was happened like this. Trains were flung off the rails as though they were toys. Such heavy trains were flung off the rails as though they were toys.
Horses, dogs, and cattle suffered the same fate as human beings. Every living thing was petrified, frightened, in an attitude of indescribable suffering. They don't know what was happening. Only thing they were feeling the suffocating heat, burning flames. Even the vegetation did not escape. Trees went up in flames. The rice plants lost their greenness.
Rice plants lost their greenness. The grass burned on the ground like dry straw. എല്ലാ ഗ്രീനറീസും എല്ലാം കത്തിപ്പോയി ആ ഒരു അത്രയും ഇൻറ്റൻസ് ഹീറ്റിൽ. Beyond the zone of utter death in which nothing remained alive. Everything got destroyed. All living organisms, animals, plants, human beings. People were crawling on the ground.
So, children, I am stopping here. Let's continue with the first atom bomb the next class. Thank you.